Hello everyone. Today's lesson is going to be on how does human activity affect water quality within an ecosystem. And one of the ecosystems that we're going to be looking at is the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So if we take a look at what a watershed is an area of land that is drained by a water system. So water system meaning a river, a stream, or a creek. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is the large watershed that we live in. So one of the things that we talk about is that if you've ever heard of the Chesapeake Bay or if you've ever been to the Chesapeake Bay, all of our water that we have here in our area and in this area with Pennsylvania, all of our water ends up getting into the Chesapeake Bay. So that's why we are considered part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So watershed is an area of land that is drained by a water system. So one of the things we're going to look at first is what is your local watershed? And to figure this out, you need to find the nearest stream or creek that you live by. So most of you are going to either live near the Connedaguinet Creek or you're going to live near the Yellow Breeches Creek. It kind of figures, it kind of is dependent on where your location is within our district. So one of the things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to look on a map. You're going to have to find where you live, and you're going to have to look at what is the nearest stream or creek near you. So if I would go on to, let's say, Google Maps, and I would put in my address, I am looking for what is my nearest stream or creek. And for some of you, it might even be something smaller than the Connedaguinet or the Yellow Breeches. So you might be near Trindle Run, you might be near there are smaller tributaries that go into these creeks. But most of you will either be near the Connedaguinet or the Yellow Breeches. These are probably your nearest two creeks. So your local watershed is your nearest stream or creek. So for me, where I live in Dauphinboro, so I'm across the river. My nearest stream or creek is Clark's Creek. So my local watershed is going to be Clark's Creek watershed. So when you look for your local watershed, it's either going to be the Connedaguinet or the Yellow Breeches. So you're going to have to look on a map and you're going to have to figure out, where you live and then which one of these is the nearest stream or creek to you. The Susquehanna River watershed, this is our next biggest watershed. All of the water, whether it's coming from the Connedaguinet Creek, whether it's coming from Yellow Breeches, whether it's coming from Clark's Creek, it's all running into the Susquehanna. So this is our next biggest watershed. The Susquehanna River then takes our water to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Okay, so if you look at the Chesapeake Bay watershed, you'll see New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, and DC. Those are all contributors into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at what is your watershed address. Figure out your local stream or creek. Then it's going to be the Susquehanna River watershed. Then it's going to be the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So for me, my watershed address here is Clark's Creek watershed, Susquehanna River watershed, and Chesapeake Bay watershed. That's my watershed address. So you will need to know your watershed address for one of the discussion questions that you're going to be doing this lesson. So why does our watershed address matter? Any water that runs off the land in your area goes to these watersheds. Any pollution items that are in the water end up in the Susquehanna and end up in the Chesapeake Bay. So if you spray fertilizers, if you spray pesticides, if you wash your car, if your car is dripping oil, if you're giving the dog a bath, all of those things, or dog waste, all of those things would end up getting into the water, and that goes into your local watershed, then it goes into the Susquehanna, then it goes into the Chesapeake Bay. So this is all dealing with how human activity affects water quality within our ecosystem. Some of the main sources of pollutions are things like nitrogen. And agriculture, manure, chemical fertilizers. Fertilizers are a big source of nitrogen. So you'll look and see, like, these are some, farm areas have a lot of fertilizers and chemicals, manure. If you have gardens and things like that, or flower beds, septic systems, which most of us have, developed lands, so even like your grasses and doing landscaping, stuff like that, municipal and industrial wastewater, those are all contributing factors to sources of nitrogen in the bay. We also have phosphorus. So once again, you're going to see agriculture, manure, and fertilizers are main sources of phosphorus, and also urban, suburban runoff, and in-stream sediment. So these are main sources of phosphorus to the bay. And then we have sediment pollution. Agriculture is a big one, urban, suburban runoff. So like whenever you see, if we have big rains and you see, a whole bunch of rainwater washing down your street, that all has to go somewhere. And it'll end up going into your local watershed, then into the Susquehanna, then into the Chesapeake Bay. So why are fertilizers bad? Why are nitrogen and phosphorus bad? Well, if you think about what fertilizers do, they cause large growths of plants. Like, we put fertilizers down so our plants will grow. Well, in water, this causes large growths of algae. Bacteria will feed on the algae, and when they're feeding, they use up the oxygen in the water. If there's no oxygen in the water, then organisms that need oxygen die. And dissolved oxygen in the water is something that all the organisms in the water need in order to live. So if there's no oxygen, those organisms end up dying. So when we start looking at this as far as like how human activity affects water quality within our ecosystem, we look at things that we are doing that affect our local watershed, which in turn would go into the Susquehanna, which in turn would go into the Chesapeake Bay. So we'll be talking a little bit about different ways that we're going to be doing, like different ways that we might pollute things. But phosphorus and nitrogen are two of the big ones. And then sediment, things like just, if you have if you have runoff and you see a drainage area and there's a whole bunch of leaves and dirt and soil in that area, that's all considered to be runoff. So in the next couple of lessons, in this lesson, you will be looking at a couple of activities that will help you understand about water quality and the Chesapeake Bay. So if you have any questions for me, office hours are 1 to 2, Monday through Friday. Hope everyone's doing well. See ya.